Hello everyone. We continue to talk about Module 1 of the Indian Knowledge System. And Module 1 talked about understanding Indian knowledge system. In lesson 1.1, we had actually learned what basic Indian knowledge system meant, how it was formulated, what were the aspects that it covered. We talked about the definition of Indian knowledge system. We also talked about the scope of Indian knowledge system. So in the definition, we did see that it is about holistic living. It encompasses everything that we have: the mind, the body, the soul, the spirit, the society, everything. Then we talked about the scope. So, all subjects that we talk about now, whether it is science, whether it is mathematics, whether it is philosophy, whether it is sociology, whether it is the environment, whether it is the economy, whether it is performing arts, art, literature, everything was there then also. So, all that we do now, that we study now, has its basic roots in the ancient knowledge system that we have. We also saw that Indus Valley civilization, which is the oldest civilization in history that was documented, it has so much to share with us. And then also during that civilization period, they had a sound governance, they had a sound economical system, they had a sound societal system. The trading system was also there. So, pretty much they were living a modern life then also according to times of those, where everything that they required, they managed to make, managed to innovate, managed to invent also to make life easier and better. Now, in lesson point 1.2, we are going to further see transmission of knowledge, whether it is oral, whether it is written, whether it is experiential. The multidisciplinary nature of Indian epistemologies. So we begin with the transmission of knowledge, whether it was oral, written, or experiential. The transmission of knowledge in Indian knowledge system, or the IKS, was a multifaceted and sophisticated process, relying heavily on a combination of oral, written, and even implicit experimental methods. So, if we think that experiments did not happen then, yes, they did, according to whatever resources or whatever tools that they had. They did experiment. That is how they evolved then also. This intricate system ensured the preservation, propagation, and often the evolution of vast amounts of knowledge over millennia. So, in the previous lesson, we did see that all the subjects that we study now, all the things that we live with now, were there present in ancient India also. It was just that innovation had not happened then. But yes, according to their needs and requirements of older times, that was more than sufficient, whatever that they had. Oral tradition. Oral tradition is Shruti and Smriti, according to the ancient India and the ancient knowledge system. The oral tradition holds a paramount position in the Indian knowledge system, particularly for sacred and foundational texts like the Vedas, which are considered Shruti, that which is heard or revealed. So it was orated and then written. This wasn't merely remote memorization, it was a highly structured and rigorous system designed for absolute accuracy and purity of transmission. So there was no dilution of the knowledge that had to be imparted from one generation to the other generation. The very first type, how it was imparted, was the Guru Shiksha Parampara, teacher disciple lineage. This was the cornerstone of oral transmission. So earlier on, they had very rare written form. Normally, only gurus imparted education at gurukuls or at ashrams, which was mostly oral, and it had to be memorized at that point in time. Knowledge was passed directly from a qualified teacher, a guru, to a dedicated student, a Shishya, through a closed, often residential relationship. So, in Gurukuls and ashrams, we do know that children were put there and had to remain there to learn the way of living and also learn the education that was imparted to them, though orally then, but yes, it was imparted. The Guru would meticulously impart knowledge, and the Shishya would internalize it through repeated recitation, deep understanding, and rigorous practice. So, recitation is basically there from the beginning. Recitation of everything that was taught in the Gurukuls, in the ashrams, to the Shishyas by the Gurus was constantly repeated so that it could take heart and it could take mind and people would be able to memorize it correctly. Elaborate memorization techniques to ensure the integrity of vast texts like Rig Veda with its 10,600 verses. Woo, that is a very large number. Sophisticated mnemonic devices were developed. So now, when we go to call centers and people are trained on vocals with the help of a mnemonic tool, so we do know that mnemonic is not something which is made now. Mnemonic is from the times people studied or Shishya studied in the ashrams and gurukuls. So these include the Padapatha, reciting texts word by word. It is slow recitation, one word at a time, so that that one word houses into your mind and you're able to understand and associate with it. Then is the Krama, reciting words in various combinations, like how a poem is A, B, B, C, C, D, to ensure the connectivity in everything that they were learning. Vikriti, even more complex patterns of recitation like the jata, mala, sikha, rekha, dhwaja, danda, ratha, ghana that involved reciting in reverse, diagonally, and in fragmented clusters. So, how difficult it may have been then, also, we can imagine and comprehend that. These techniques safeguarded against omissions and alterations so that Shishyas would not forget or would not alter it according to how they remember it. It was actually recited of how it was told to them, not the convenience of the Shishya. Shiksha and Pratisakhya texts. These are specialized treatises on phonetics, pronunciation, intonation, articulation, ensuring the precise oral rendering of sacred texts. So, when we learn about phonetics, of pronunciation, of intonation, and articulation now in schools, it has been there since of long. However, the language and the way that we may be doing it may have changed, but yes, the base has remained the same. Performative dimensions. Many oral traditions were intertwined with performative aspects, such as chanting, singing, and storytelling. So it is easy when we chant, it is easy when we sing, it is easy in the form of a story. If we see with little children also, so if it is in some kind of a melody like chanting, they tend to memorize it quicker. If it is singing like a rhyme, it is more enjoyable. And if it is storytelling, it is more interesting. This made the learning process engaging and aided memorization. Community and family based transmission. In many specialized knowledge domains, example traditional crafts, certain medical practices, specific rituals, knowledge was also transmitted within families or specific communities, often through apprenticeship and practical training. So, apprenticeship is nothing but like an intern, a learning intern who basically learns with experience and then follows through. And practical learning, experiential learning again, whatever is orally shared is practiced in person also. So, crafts, traditional crafts, medicinal practices, specific rituals. So that continues now also. That is how we learn, that is how we gain perfection. So, how do we learn? Let's just take a quick look. Concrete experience, doing, having an experience, basic knowledge, reflective observation, reviewing, reflecting on the experience, whatever we've experienced, we tend to reflect back and pick up what we find essential. Abstract conceptualization, concluding, learning from the experience, whatever we want to take. Active experimentation, planning, trying out what you have learned. So, how do we effectively learn is the cycle that we've just seen. First, we have to actually learn the concept, then, we have to reflect upon it, then, we have to conclude however we want to take it forward, and then how we plan and we execute whatever we've taken as a learning. Now, that was about the oral way, oral tradition. Now is the written tradition, Smriti and Shastras. While oral tradition was foundational, it formed the basic, the written tradition also played a crucial role in the Indian knowledge system, especially for texts that were considered Smriti, that which is remembered, or tradition, form that was. Philosophical treatises, darshanas, scientific texts, shastras, and various literary works. The very first that we will talk about is manuscripts. Knowledge was meticulously inscribed on various materials, most notably palm leaves, which was very economical and ecological too, birch bark, again economical and ecological, and later paper, which was economical, sort of, but not very ecological. Scribes, scholars, and sometimes entire monastic communities were involved in copying, preserving, and disseminating these manuscripts. That is how these manuscripts still hold importance and continue to be. Their existence is still there. People do refer to them still because they were important and well written and original and authentic. Commentaries, or the tika. A significant part of the written tradition involved the creation of elaborate commentaries on existing texts. These commentaries clarified difficult passages, offered different interpretations, debated opposing viewpoints, and often added new insights, thereby enriching and expanding the knowledge base. So, commentaries are there now also, but commentaries have been there. That is how the knowledge system has been so firm. Sutra literature. Many branches of knowledge were confided in sutra form, short aphoristic statements that were easy to memorize and served as conscious summaries of complex ideas. These were often accompanied by detailed commentaries of elaboration. So they were spoken and elaborated for us to understand them better. Community and family based transmission. In many specialized knowledge domains, knowledge was also transmitted within families or specific communities, often through apprenticeship and practical training. So, here also there is lots of apprenticeship and practical training that brought around the family based transmissions from which have been going from centuries. Your grandparents, your great grandparents have carried it with them. How about experiential transmission now? Direct observation and practice, which is very important. Without direct observation and practice, the learning becomes a little difficult because you see it hands on, it makes it more fun to learn, more easy to learn. Yoga and meditation, they give us a holistic way of living, holistic approach to learning and living. Ayurveda, the science which gives us medicines, the knowledge of medicines and how to use them. Arts and crafts, that is basically experiential at large. Arts, all performing arts. Crafts, also learned with trade, with practice. Agriculture and environmental practices, they have been ongoing. People have talked about agriculture and environment practices and have carried it out, have actually practiced it. That is how the agriculture system still has a base in the ancient learning. Multidisciplinary nature of Indian epistemologies. Indian epistemologies are profoundly multidisciplinary in nature, reflecting a holistic approach to understanding reality and knowledge that transcends rigid disciplinary boundaries often seen in Western thoughts as well. So, here, if we take a look at the picture, we have a truth circle, we have a belief circle, and then overlapping is our knowledge circle. So there is a truth system that the study that gives to us, a belief system that the ancient knowledge gives to us, and then in the center is the knowledge, which is an overlap. And that is how the systems worked. That is how the learning aspect works. It worked then and it continues to work now as well. The multidisciplinary character is evident in several key aspects. The very first is integration of philosophy, logic, and metaphysics. Epistemology is not a standalone discipline. It cannot stand by itself, it's not individual. In India, Indian thought, epistemology, Pramana Shastra, is intricately woven with metaphysics. Now, what is metaphysics? Tattavastra or ontology, and logic, Nyaya or Hitovidya. The theories of knowledge are developed in direct response to questions about the nature of reality, and vice versa. So, if we do not question anything's existence, we remain in oblivion. So we need to be very clear, like how children keep asking a question till the time they are clear, same is it here too. What one can know is directly related to what exists. Pramanas are a source of valid knowledge, how they formed the foundation of knowledge. Different schools of thought such as Nyaya, Vaisesika, Samkhya, Yoga, Mimamsa, and Vedanta. The 6 orthodox schools. We talk about orthodox means the ancient, but our learning system still owes their base to all these 6 orthodox systems, as well as heterodox schools like Buddhism and Jainism. Extensively debate the validity and scope of various pramanas, means of valid knowledge, means the base. How valid the learning system was then. Was it experiential? Did it have a firm foundation? That. Engagement with linguistic and grammar. So grammar was there then also. Philosophy of language. Indian philosophical systems, especially the Mimamsa and Nyaya schools, made profound contributions to the philosophy of language. They delved into the meaning of words, shabda, the structure of sentences, the relationship between language and thought, and the process of understanding. So here also now we do use a perfect sentence structure. So then also they used a sentence structure, otherwise the meaning of that sentence would have been lost, just as now that it is. Grammar, the Vyakran. The tradition of Sanskrit grammar, exemplified by Panini's Ashtadhyaya, is itself a highly sophisticated, logical, and analytical system. It influenced how knowledge was structured, transmitted, and understood across various disciplines. Debates on the nature of universals, particulars, and causality were often framed in linguistic terms, language. Psychology and consciousness studies. Nature of mind, manas or chitta. Epistemological discussion in India, thought invariably involved detailed analysis of the mind, consciousness, and their role in knowledge acquisition. How we gained our knowledge basically was how the mind, the conscious, and their role was analyzed. Schools like yoga provided intricate models of the mind's function, example, the chitta and the vritti. pathways to higher states of consciousness, and relationship between mental state and reality, the mind and the body. Perception and cognition, the various theories of perception, pratyaksha, meticulously examine the processes of sensory input, how we feel, mental processing, and the formation of knowledge. This often touches upon what might be considered early forms of cognitive psychology. Cognitive psychology, very popular now, but yes, see, the roots are there in your ancient history. Ethics and praxis, practical application. Knowledge of liberation, that is moksha. For many Indian schools, the ultimate goal of knowledge, vidya, is not merely intellectual understanding, but liberation from suffering, dukkha, and the cycle of rebirth, samsara. This imbues epistemology with an ethical and soteriological dimension. Karma and the moral responsibility, which is very important now, was very important then as well. The theory of karma, which connects actions to consequences, often informs epistemological discussions about free will, determinism, and the ethical implications of knowledge and ignorance. Applied knowledge. Indian epistemologies are rarely detached from practical life. They're very close with practical life, with the practical aspect of running our lives. Whether in Ayurveda, medicine, Jyotisa, astronomy and astrology, yoga, or even statecraft, the Arthashastra. The validity of knowledge is often tested through its effectiveness in practical application and achieving desired outcomes. Interschool debates and dialectics, Vada, debate tradition. So, this tradition has been there and just not newly found. The intellectual landscape of classical India was characterized by vibrant and rigorous debates between different philosophical schools. Each school developed its epistemological framework not in isolation but in critical engagement with the others. So it was more like a holistic learning, combined learning. This dialectical process refined arguments, clarified concepts, and pushed the boundaries of inquiry. Shared vocabulary and methods. Despite their differences, schools often share a common vocabulary and analytical methods, allowing for constructive engagement across diverse perspectives. So, a number of subjects, diverse perspectives, and a constructive engagement, something which has an output, a fruitful output. This cross pollination of ideas further enriched the multidisciplinary nature of Indian epistemology. Now, to conclude about Indian epistemologies, they are inherently multidisciplinary because they do not separate the study of knowledge from its broader context of reality, consciousness, language, ethics, and practical application. They represent a holistic and integrated approach to inquiry where insights from various domains converge to form a comprehensive understanding of how we know and what we can know. With this, we come to an end of lesson 1.2. I hope we did learn how the ancient Indian system is helping us and has its base, its foundation in the ancient realms of India. And everything that was learned or developed then, be it the scientific system, be it experiential learning, be it the ecology, be it the experimental ways of learning, be it the debates, so all was there then as well. Thank you.